Hello, and welcome to an intro to Anthro with two humans. I'm human number one, John McCray.
And I'm human number two, John Lehr.
And this is the podcast where we reassess what it means to be human. And the title of today's episode is Who's Biting Who? Humans' Lust for Vampires.
Oh, yeah.
John.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of your topics. A few months ago, you were the one that sent me, you said to me, what about vampires? so I don't know.
Well, it's just such a bizarre, it's just been around forever. And what the hell? Why do we obsess with this, with vampires sucking each other's blood and such?
I don't know.
What's going on?
Have you always been into vampires, or or did this just come up? Or I never knew. Were you a goth? Were you into the goth?
No, never a goth. But I like Dracula. I like vampires. I like monster movies. But not in a huge way. But listen, if what do you call it? What's the movie with the boys? What was that called?
Lost Boys.
Lost Boys. Look, if it's on, I'll watch a few minutes of it.
That was a good one.
That was a good one.
I actually, I was into Bauhaus in college, and I was also into Baudelaire. So there's definitely some crossover with the goth. If you take Baudelaire and Bauhaus, you're gonna show up at some of the same events. You know what I mean with the goth.
Yeah. And I loved Interview with a Vampire. I read that at one point. And
did you read them all, or did you?
I don't know. I read a couple.
Yeah.
They were great.
So again, you've mentioned already Lost Boys, but there's just thousands and thousands of vampire books, comics, TV shows, movies.
It's unreal. And it keeps happening. They're still. I just saw in the trades that they're doing some vampire movie.
We need to do a vampire.
I know. Yeah, we do. You're right about that.
You still got it. You still got it for a vampire. You could still. So I'm going to throw out a few, and we could just discuss some of the where they've had vampires in movies.
Yes.
You have, of course, Dracula with Bela Lugosi. Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's my favorite Dracula, I think.
Yes, that's right. Christopher Lee. Oh, my God.
He did them in the Hammer films.
And wasn't he in Star Wars, Christopher Lee? Or I'm thinking of somebody else?
Oh, that's Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing always played Van Helsing. He always played the vampire hunter, So Christopher Lee.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Frank Langella played Dracula. That one back in the 80s. You had George Hamilton in Love at First Bite.
That's a pretty funny movie. There's some funny moments in that movie.
Yeah, I think Leslie Nielsen played Dracula in that Mel Brooks movie, Dracula Dead and Loving It. I think it was.
Never saw it, but good.
And then Gary Oldman, who played in the Francis Ford Coppola.
Which was great. That was a great one. Returns into Rats.
Yeah.
Remember that?
And then you had Nosferatu, which was the F.W. Murnau, the German one. Which that one's scary.
That's a scary one.
Apparently, that was he didn't get permission from Bram Stoker's widow to do that one. That's why it's still the Dracula story, but he had to change. He thought he was changing enough to where he wouldn't get in trouble for copyright.
Wow.
And,
did he get sued?
He did get sued, and he was supposed to destroy every copy, but there was one copy in Japan that didn't get destroyed, and that's what we get all the copies from. Like, it's a brilliant film now. Yeah,
it is pretty great. It's so scary.
Oh yeah, that Max
slowness. Oh my God, it's so spooky.
It's completely just like, I'm going to try to rip it. It's like, of course she found out about it. You know what I mean?
Well, it's going to be public domain now, though, right? Or is it still? It's
I think
gotta
it's
be.
public
All right,
domain
so it's
now.
time for us to jump in the pool.
Get on your fangs, and we'll give you a cloak. And,
I can use my caveman teeth, and we can just augment them.
yeah.
I've still got them.
You still have a tux, right? We could put you in a tux.
I got an old tux. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
We're done. We're ready to go.
We start production next week. So get ready. Then you had all the vampire movies from the 50s, which, and you even had Abbott and Costello meet.
I saw that one. Yep.
And then you had, remember, the Italian Giallo. The Italians kind of took it like really, really sexy. They were kind of almost like softcore vampire movies.
Yeah, of course.
You had Blackula in the 70s, which was a black vampire.
Yes.
The Hunger with Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie and Susan Sarandon. Yeah, that was
very sexy.
Yeah,
sexy.
I love that one because remember the whole story. That spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but remember, has Catherine Deneuve as the head vampire gives people eternal life, but she doesn't give them eternal youth. And that's what the story is. So it's this tragic thing of like they don't stay young forever.
Getting older and older and older.
Yeah, yeah. Lost Boys, like you mentioned, True Blood, Twilight, Fright Night. Remember Fright Night?
Funny, good one. And also some really scary moments. Like when his girlfriend turns into one and she gets that big grin or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That freaked me
that's
out.
awful. Yeah. I forgot about that. Salem's Lot. Remember when David Soul was in that? I think.
Oh my God. David Soul. Yep.
And then we get to now What We Do in the Shadows, the series.
Yes. Well, wait a minute. You forgot Near Dark. That
Near
one
Dark.
that's a good one. With that kid in it. That kid's in it. And he's really, oh my God. If you haven't seen Near Dark, I highly recommend it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check that one. That was just all. Go ahead.
They're in Texas and it's and they have to hurry back to the motel to put up duct tape all the windows so that they don't no sun destroys it. And it's great. It's great.
Yeah,
it's like white trash vampires.
Oh, that's great. Those were all just ones off the top of my head. I didn't even Google or anything.
That's amazing.
Trying to make it. What I love about What We Do in the Shadows is they've added the energy vampire to the vampire canon. They have Colin Robinson, who just looks like a normal guy, but he's so boring.
Sucks all the energy. That's so great. That show is so wonderful.
Yeah,
it's just wonderful.
So we should. I was going to mention, if people think of other good vampire, go ahead and send those in to us on our Facebook page, and we'll post those.
Please do.
As well.
Please do. We need to get a good list. Exhaustive.
And then as I was thinking about vampires when I was putting this one together, I was thinking usually in the stories themselves, it's vampires who lust after humans, who they want humans, they want to consume humans' life. But really, looking at the number of stories over the last 500 years, it's like humans are the ones that are humans are lusting after vampires.
Right. Right. They just find them, they're so sexy.
Yeah. And so there's something that appeals to us, but just so we know what we're talking about when we say vampire. In her article, A History of the Word Vampire, Katarina Wilson mentions an article or a novel, not a novel, it was a book in 1810 called Travels of Three English Gentlemen from Venice to Hamburg. And what they said in 1810 was, vampires are supposed to be the bodies of deceased persons animated by evil spirits, which come out of the graves in the nighttime, suck the blood of many of the living, and thereby destroy them. So that was just three guys on that was like a travel log back in the 1810. They then say those who are destroyed by them after their death become vampires, so that to prevent so spreading an evil, it is found requisite to drive a stake through the dead body, from whence on this occasion the blood flows as if the person was alive. Yeah. So
if I turn into a vampire, I need you to drive a stake
really?
through my heart.
Okay, listen,
You'd have to do it.
I'm not taking any chances.
I swear I won't bite you. Just
you're like, I'm not a vampire yet. Just to be sure, I like to be a little proactive. So anyway, vampires are people who are undead, and apparently Bram Stoker was the guy who came up with the term undead.
You got to give it to Bram. I mean, that's a great. He really came up with a great story there.
Yeah. He borrowed a lot, as we'll see. He borrowed a lot from other vampire stories, but he really compiled it all together.
He compiled it all in a really nice way.
Yeah. And I always thought that the word undead would have been around forever. Like, that seems like an ancient word.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Apparently it's the same.
Like voodoo, or it would be somewhere.
I mean, you just put "un" in front of "dead."
Yeah, how hard is it?
Apparently,
it's like Uncola, but 7-Up, when they came up with the Uncola, that was really good. So it's like contemporary art. You see a painting that's all white, you're like, I could have done that. But you didn't. You didn't until Bram did it.
We should label ourselves the Unpodcast.
That's genius. Yes, that's a great idea.
Put that down.
I love
Let's see if anybody else has done that.
Okay, you got it.
He also came up with the word Nosferatu, which they say that sounds like such a great word, Nosferatu.
And he came up with that.
They have there's no etymology for the word Nosferatu that they could track down.
You're kidding me. No, Bram.
Yeah.
Just sitting around, Nosferatu, no, Nosferatu. Wait a second, I'm onto something.
He just goes to work like saying it over and over again. He can't stop saying it at that point.
Nosferatu.
Singing it. Nosferatu. Yeah, so they think maybe they can't find out where he got it from.
Wow, interesting.
And in his book, Vampire Forensics, Uncovering the Origins of the Enduring Legend, Mark Jenkins quotes a folklorist by the name of Michael Bell, who said, "What better food for the imagination than a creature that incorporates sex, blood, violence, shape-shifting, superhuman power, and eternal life?"
Yeah, it's a great superhero. He's the worst kind.
Yeah. And I think that there's, when it comes down to it, I think that's why we're all a little jealous of the vampire.
Hell yeah. And it's that wonderful, because, everlasting life is something that is just, because we're so afraid of death. And to hear and to see a story that shows that that's not as great as it is,
right?
That it has its pluses and minuses, I think is us sort of exploring our own mortality,
Yeah. But it always seems like, don't you think that, like, we're jealous that the vampire, he always gets, or she always gets all the girls.
Always.
Like they're the sexiest ones in the room.
Yep.
They have lots of money, as if, I don't know, if you live a long time, you could save money or something.
Yeah, easy. You got to hit a few things right over, the past few centuries. And you just got to hang on to it. It's like Interview with the Vampire. You just hang on to stuff, and then it turns into antiques, and you sell that.
That's brilliant. I never even thought of it that way. But you never see like a vampire like having a job at a fast food restaurant.
No,
you never see like doing taxes at H&R Block over during tax season or something.
But instead of the modern retellings, they've got to pretend like they have a job.
Yeah,
like in Lost Boys, he works at the. What is the head vampire? The older one. Yeah. He works at a little souvenir shop, I think.
Yeah,
or something like
that. Yeah, I have to watch that one again. I watched Coppola's Dracula last night to get ready for this.
Oh, how was it? Does it stand up?
It still holds up, and I'll talk about it later. But I always people used to give it a hard time for like Keanu Reeves and
Mm,
for Winona Ryder,
yeah.
their performances. But I think Coppola got the campiness of the whole thing. To me, when I read the novel, it was very campy,
Right. Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's not trying to be a realistic story. Like just the production, everything. It's just trying to be like a fun Dracula movie. And to me, that's what he captured getting, those two as Jonathan Harker and Mina Murray of just have fun with it. Of course they don't sound like they're English. It doesn't matter,
It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's
No.
like a play that you're seeing in yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, you mentioned already the fact that they never grow old,
Yes.
vampires, which means you never experience any of the embarrassing things about growing old.
Yep.
You never
Yep.
lo- lose their hair. Or they
You
never,
can wear boxers forever. You never have to shift to tidy whities, you know?
or they shift back or whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I myself have always seen vampires in two ways, and the first way I see them is they're like the guys who graduate from high school and then still hang out around high school. You know what I mean? It's like they don't move
Yeah.
on. They don't move on. They're just hanging
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Um, what was it? It was
That's
Matthew
great.
McConaughey in
Oh, all right, all right, all right.
yeah, Dazed and Confused. Remember, he's
Oh,
like, "Oh,
yeah.
high school girls, they all stay. I get older, they all stay the same age." Or something. Um,
That's a great character.
yeah, but that's how I see him. Like, that's one way I see him of like being, like, okay, you've had your
Yeah.
time. Of course you
Yeah.
know everything. You've been around. You
Yeah.
know. And the second way I see them are like the guys in college who had a lot of money who who always were popular, could take girls out on lots of dates, could go on spring break, were good looking. They just had everything. That's kind of
Yeah.
how I see vampires as well.
Yeah, that's true. They're kind of the dicks, really, of the monsters. They've got everything going their way.
Yeah.
And yet they
Yeah.
always seem to get it never ends well. The
Well,
vampire always gets his, but that's just the fantasy you think of the nerds. You
that's
get
what
to
I was
finally
thinking.
kill the
Yeah,
the
yeah.
untouchable. That's interesting.
And in that way, I was thinking about it. It's like it's all the same story, whether it's Dracula or Revenge of the Nerds. It's all the same. It's all the same. We all love, as a nerd, you love to see the cool guy get it. You know what I mean?
Yes, but in the end, but in real life, it doesn't work that way.
No, that's why it's a fantasy. That's why we love the movie.
They just squash us like bugs.
Yeah, and they get more money and get wealthier and get better looking as they get older.
God damn it.
And so anyway, you mentioned as well, like Mark Jenkins, in his book, he also quotes Peter Nichols, who wrote the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction. And Nichols says that it's better to be a vampire than a werewolf or a zombie.
Hell yes. What? We're supposed to like applaud that? Yeah.
Well, Nichols, he then goes on, he says vampires are aristocratic.
Yes.
And in the iconography of horror, the vampire stands for sex.
Yes.
And I would agree. I would agree with that.
Yes.
Can you think of any like sexy zombies?
No, of course not. But you could do. I mean, the only thing I can think of, but she's kind of a vampire, succubus. She's a vampire, right? But she uses sex to drain you or something. I don't know what the story is behind succubus.
Yeah, when you're sleeping, she'll show up.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean.
And you, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right.
That doesn't sound like a zombie just kind of stumbling around, trying to get it.
Losing his arm. Mm-mm.
Yeah,
no.
Like looking out, like when you're barricaded in some place, you look out and you're like, "Hey, that's a pretty good looking zombie." Out there. I don't think you're.
No.
No. But anyway, Nichols goes on. He says the werewolf stands for instability and lack of self-control.
Yes. You never know when you're going to, I mean, you do because it's the moon, but it's not within it's going to happen whether you like it or not.
Right. And you don't know what you're going to do when that happens.
Yeah.
You know what I
Well, you're
mean?
going to rip your clothes off. You know that.
Yeah. Probably make duties in the kitchen or something. I don't know. It's going to be bad.
It's not going to end well. I
They're
always
always
thought
embarrassed.
I always thought being a werewolf is like being an alcoholic. You know, you never know when it's going to just
Yeah.
take you away. Oh God, you wake up on a bender.
Yeah.
Oh,
You wake up naked out in the park and you can't remember how you got there. It sounds very
hey,
familiar.
I woke up on people's front lawns.
Maybe you're a werewolf. Maybe you're not a vampire. Maybe you're a werewolf.
No, I'm definitely a werewolf. I wish I were a vampire.
And so, just to finish up, so Nichols says that the vampire is aristocratic, the werewolf is middle class, and the zombie, mindlessly stumbling around and rotting, is working class.
Yeah. God damn it.
The zombie is the exploited worker of the horror world.
Oh, I've had jobs where getting up early and going to do a mindless job where you're just a zombie.
Yeah.
You're just going in. Oh.
Yeah. Just stumbling around.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But anyway, so then we go on to, well, where did this obsession with vampires come from? And I think I mentioned already about the word Nosferatu, but we don't really even know where the word vampire actually came from.
Wow. It's all mysterious, just like the story.
Right, exactly. And Katerina Wilson, again, in her article, she says that some people think the word could come from Turkish, some people think it comes from Greek, some from Hebrew, or some from Hungarian. And some people say that it comes from a Slavic word or words like upior, uper, upir, which are all derivatives of the Turkish word uber, which means witch.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then other people think it may come from the Greek word pi, which means to drink.
Oh, but hey, that don't misunderstand. Never drink your pee.
No. Actually,
but if you
can
have
you imagine
to.
If that was the type of vampire, if that's what they would drink,
it'd be like, fine, here, take it away.
It'd be kind of embarrassing. You gotta feel sorry for them at that point.
Get out of my house, you disgusting urine breath.
There's a vampire in the bathroom. You don't go in there. You know?
God. You see him with his head down in the toilet looking up, caught like a dog, you know, when you catch a dog in there.
Get out of there. Get out
here,
of there.
Get out, vampire. Here's a mason jar. Go.
Shake the can at him. And then Wilson also notes that in Hungary and Transylvania, the supposed homeland of vampires, the term vampire exists only as a neologism, which is like a recently coined word.
Interesting.
And was never as popular as it is in the West. And in Hungarian, the word vampire first appeared in 1786.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those Hungarians were all, weren't they? That's when they had Hungarians were with the Austrian Empire, right? Weren't they the soldiers for the Austrian Empire?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's when it started to kick up.
They were getting the word from the West, and we were. It's probably just because we were, attributing these vampire stories to the Austrian or Central Europe or Eastern Europe.
But wasn't Count Dracula a real person? I'm sure you're going to get to this.
Well, I mean, he was Vlad the Impaler was a real person. And he did live in Wallachia and in Transylvania in the 1400s, and he did impale a lot of people. Damn. But, Bram Stoker just was grabbing, apparently, originally when he had written the first drafts of the story, it's not in Transylvania. And
really?
He found a guidebook by a woman who had written a guidebook about traveling in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and had mentioned Transylvania being a very superstitious place. Ooh. And so then he changed it to Transylvania.
He's a genius.
I know.
He's a genius. Man, it all came together on this book.
Yeah. And what's great about him, he was friends with Oscar Wilde.
Really?
Yeah, and he was Bram Stoker was married to Oscar Wilde's childhood sweetheart, a
Oscar
woman named.
Wilde sounds like a fun guy to be around, man.
I know, I
I'd
know.
hang out. I'd be wanting to hang out with him too.
And that's why I always thought when I read the book Dracula, I always like he's having fun. You know what I
Yes.
mean? He's like joking around with it. He's poking fun. It's satire. It's not meant to be real.
That's so great. I wonder if Oscar Wilde, pitched him a couple of things. Hey, you know what you should have him do?
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing, Bram Stoker managed a theater. So he had a theater background and he wrote the books to make a little extra money. But again, it shows you that he knew he was coming at it from a theater guy, knowing that you have to put something in there that people are going to love and want to see and want to read. It's all about the audience.
Yes. No wonder it's such a hit on movies, It's just okay, wow. This is really interesting. I thought for sure that this was a deeper. It's not that new. I mean, it's not that old.
Yeah, I mean, as far as what we consider like the guy in the nice suit who goes around, coming to people when they're sleeping at night, that's all relatively from the 1700s on.
Wow.
But Violet Fenn, in her book, A History of the Vampire and Popular Culture, she says this idea of bloodsuckers has been around for, millennia, basically.
Yeah.
And in Greek mythology, you had Lamia, Lamia, who was having an affair with Zeus. And when Zeus's wife Hera found out about it, she killed all of Lamia's children.
Oh,
and so then Lamia got revenge by then sucking out the blood of all human children.
Jeez. Why? Why did they because they were Zeus's children and it was a way to get back at Zeus?
Just like, you get me, I'm going to get you.
Why the sucking the blood? It's just so, oh my God.
Hera also apparently made it to where Lamia couldn't sleep at night. And so what Zeus did was, for the insomnia, he made it to where Lamia could take out her eyeballs in order to sleep. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. What, she'd like put him in a drawer or something so that they, or he took him out forever. Or could she put him back in?
She could put him back in. Yeah.
Jesus. Ooh, you don't want to lose one. You got to have, you know what I mean? Put him where you put your keys, right in the dish.
Where are they? And then Fenn also talks about the Jewish book Sefer Hasidim from the 13th century that tells the story of an old female vampire named Astriya, Astryiah, who supposedly sucks the victim's blood through her hair.
Through her hair?
Yeah, that's what nobody ever explains that. How she does
what?
it.
So she just rubs her head on people?
Yeah. It feels good at first, and you're kind of thinking it's romantic, and then next thing you know, you're like can't get up off the couch.
Yeah, that's so weird. Her hair.
And Fenn notes that a lot of these really old vampire stories, of course, have to do with women killing babies and children.
Yes.
So you could see like who's being set up as the villain in all of these stories.
And Jews, there's the drinking of the blood libel.
Oh yeah, that's right.
A great way to be an anti-Semite, a great anti-Semitic story that's been passed for Yeah.
But anyway, Jews and women, and especially when it comes to women, it's uncontrolled sexuality. If women's sexuality is what is seen as what's bad. If you have uncontrolled sexuality or overt sexuality for women, that's going to bring a vampire around.
That's scary as hell.
I know.
I guess.
I know.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, there's also, and it doesn't even matter because it could be controlled sexuality or it's just women's sexuality, really, because there was a 1748 poem by the German writer Heinrich Ossenfelder called Der Vampir. And in this one, Ossenfelder, the poem is told from the point of view of a guy who's been spurned by a lover. Like he's trying to chat her up. He's trying to like seduce her. And she is saying, no, my mother says I shouldn't do it. I'm not interested. I'm not interested. And he's mad because she is not openly sexual. And what he says is he's going to come to her like a vampire and get his revenge on her. So he says, "And as softly thou art sleeping, to thee shall I come creeping, and thy life's blood drain away, and so shalt thou be trembling, for thus shall I be kissing, and death's threshold thou it be crossing." Yeah. So yeah, yeah. So it's an awful story, not only because it's like a guy who's been spurned. It's like, man, just move on. She's not into it. She's not.
He's like a stalker. He's
right.
he's Jesus.
But again, it's like, yeah, that's where a woman who's not sexually open.
Right.
Or
yeah, but women, they can't be too much or too little. You always got,
yeah, you can't.
Somebody's always upset.
Yeah. And then in 1810, Lord Byron wrote a poem called the Giaour, and it tells a story of a woman in Turkey who falls in love with an infidel, who I guess Giaour is a Turkish word for an infidel. And anyway, the woman is murdered by her master for falling in love with the infidel, and the infidel murders the master. But then the Giaour, the infidel, he's punished by becoming a vampire, and he feeds off his own family members.
Oh!
Yeah, and the poem says, "But first on earth as vampires sent, thy corse shall from its tomb be rent, then ghastly haunt thy native place, and suck the blood of all thy race."
Jesus.
So again, it's like women's actions, whether it be too openly sexual or like not openly sexual, it's going to create a vampire.
Jesus.
That's the one thing that's the constant in all these stories.
They just suck the life right out of you.
Yeah.
But it's so funny that it shifted to our vampire, the vampire that is always a man. Like, it's a real deviation.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a few female vampires. When we start getting into like our modern idea of a vampire, they trace that back to John Polidori, who he wrote a book called The Vampire in 1819.
Okay, I thought you were talking about the bass player for Led Zeppelin for a minute.
Yeah. Polidori, he was actually Lord Byron's doctor. And he went along with like Byron and Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley and Claire Clairmont. They all went down to Switzerland. I think it was in 1816. And they all stayed in a villa. And they had a contest. If you don't want to read the history of it, there's the movie Gothic by Ken Russell. And it tells the story of when they were all there at that villa in Switzerland.
Were they just partying hard and talking about dark stuff?
Yeah, the movie has Gabriel Byrne, Julian Sands, who recently passed away, Natasha Richardson, and Timothy Spall plays John Polidori. And I'm a huge Timothy Spall fan.
Yes. He got gypped on the role. I mean, you got all those famous people, and then you got him, John Paul. Who?
Yeah, Polidori. Yeah,
Polidori. Yeah. Oh, he's out getting the beer. He'll be back.
Yeah. That's just kind of like how he was. He was just kind of like the guy hanging around at the party. Those
Lord Byron's like, "Hey, man, John,
I'm out of smokes.
Would you mind?"
But anyway, during that trip, apparently they had a contest that they were trying to see who could write a ghost story or a gothic story. And Mary Shelley's story that she came up with on that trip, of course, became Frankenstein.
Oh, man.
And John Polidori also wrote a story about a vampire called The Vampire. And his was published in 1819 and became really popular as well.
Wow. So John Polidori came through. He got a little taste.
Right. And apparently he took a fragment of a story that Byron had already started, and Byron had thrown it away, and Polidori took that.
Oh, God.
as the basis for his story.
There you go. Polidori's cleaning up, and he's like, "Hey, Byron, do you mind if I take that?" "No, go ahead. I don't care."
Yeah, yeah.
Take it.
And apparently, when it was published, the publisher even put a story by Lord Byron to try to
No.
sell more.
Well,
So,
that's good. I mean, Byron does deserve story by on that.
yeah, yeah. But apparently, Byron was furious, even, and so that led to like their friendship broke up after that because of
because he was leeching off of Byron's fame.
yeah. Yeah,
Damn.
It's like Hall & Oates. Hall & Oates,
Yeah.
I guess. Maybe it's like it still happens.
Same thing. God, you're right. The oldest story ever told.
Yeah.
Cain.
Oh, let's hope we don't do that. Let's hope we don't. I hope we don't.
It's the only thing that's either we're going to die or we're going to turn on each other.
Let's just keep this thing going.
Those are our only options.
I'm kind of hoping our last episode is when we both like, okay, that's it. Turn off the machines. We're done.
Done. And then we just stop and die. I would love that.
Yeah,
God,
together.
That would really make the podcast jump in viewership.
The unpodcast jumping.
Right, the unpodcast. The unpodcast.
But anyway, Polidori's book tells a story of a guy named Aubrey who becomes friends with a Lord Rathven, which sounds like very thinly vague to Polidori and Lord Byron, you know.
It sure does. Maybe Byron wasn't just upset about his name being on the book. Wait a minute. This dickhead, you're doing me. No, of course not.
It's Lord Rathven. It doesn't even sound like you.
Yeah, but we both have lords. Wow, that's where it stops. That's the one similarity.
There's lots of lords out there. Lord Tennyson, you don't see, is he upset about it? No, nobody's upset about it.
Okay.
But anyway, this story tells Aubrey meets Lord Rathven and they travel together through Europe. And through their travels, again, sounding a lot like Polidori and Byron, Aubrey realizes that Lord Rathven is a vampire.
Oh, no wonder. You make me look like an asshole. This wasn't the scrap of paper that I wrote. I turned it a little bit, you know. You still may want me to go out and get your smokes?
Yeah. Yes, I went out. It's like a 4-day ride to get smokes, you know. It's like, while I was there, I worked on this. And people say that Polidori's book is the first one to try to put a vampire into one continuous, coherent narrative.
Wow.
Which I think that's interesting.
Okay, that's interesting.
And then Fenn also talks about in the 1840s, there was a serial story in the newspapers in London called Varney the Vampire or The Feast of Blood.
Ooh, well, that's much better. I would have led with the second title, the subtitle. Because Varney the Vampire, Jesus. It's like a cartoon or something.
Who was that? Jim Varney. Wasn't there Jim Varney was a guy who played like Earl or somebody, or he played like some, he went to camp. What was he? Remember he was like a redneck guy, Jim Varney, played a character.
Yes. Hey, Vern. What do you mean, Vern?
That
guy.
Yeah.
Ernest
goes to camp. Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's all I could think about when I was thinking Varney the Vampire was having that guy, Jim Varney.
Hey, what you talking about, Earl? That guy was a genius, though. That Ernest guy. Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
He took that character and wrung every drop out of it.
Yeah.
Damn.
So easy. Like once you get it, it's all so perfectly formed. You could just go in and do it in your sleep. You know what I mean?
Not a dummy. He just banged it out.
But Fenn says that, the Varney, the vampire from that series gave us a lot of the things that we see as in vampire stories now. For example, Varney was the first one that had sharpened fang-like teeth.
Yeah.
And Varney actually, what became interesting with Varney is Varney over the course of the series became sympathetic. Like
human. He was three-dimensional.
Right.
I never understood the fangs. Were the fangs supposed to, were you sucking the blood through the fangs? Or the fangs just poked holes so that then you could suck the blood out of the holes that you poked with the fangs?
That's a good question.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't think they're like straws. I don't think, because where would it go?
Well, I obviously haven't thought that through.
Yeah, like a couple of juice box. It's like a juice box. You just have a really just you just look at that neck like, I can't
But you
wait.
always see the fangs going in there, but they're never like sucking like.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
I think that's what it is. That's the only thing you could do, right? You'd have to
How do you
puncture
know?
it.
The only way somebody would know as much as you know is if they're a vampire.
Yeah.
You son of a bitch.
Into podcast. Into unpodcast. It just goes to. Listen, if I was a vampire, I wouldn't be doing this thing.
Yeah, you got that right. Okay.
I'd be somewhere else.
You're off the hook.
It's circumstantial evidence, but even still.
You got me there.
Yeah. In 1872, there was an Irish writer named Sheridan Le Fanu who wrote a book called Carmilla, which was the first lesbian vampire.
Whoa.
In 1872. Whoa. Yeah.
Whoa. So I'm sure it's just loaded with, it's just anti-homosexual, right? It's like painting the lesbian as an evil creature. Is that?
Yeah. I didn't have a chance to read it. I have it. Okay. I got it on my my Kindle, but they've made it into a movie in 2019. But apparently it's a young woman a strange woman comes to her house named Carmilla, and Carmilla is just very interested in her. And there's all these allusions to lesbianism of like, but I'll have to watch the movie.
Who's in the movie?
I don't know. It was English movie. I don't remember it over here. I actually had to search to see if Carmilla had ever been made into a movie.
Wow. No, never seen it.
But what was interesting, apparently reading about it, is as they put together that this Carmilla is a vampire, they realize other stories where a woman with a name that's an anagram of Carmilla who has been like
for years and years.
Yeah. So I thought that was
kind
of
spooky. I like that. She just changes her name.
Markilla. Like they like, there was a woman named Markilla back, 100 years ago who was,
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. And then we get to Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was actually written in 1897. And we've talked about it already that he worked at a theater, and it's told in an epistolary style. So I'm not sure if you've ever read it, but it's all told through letters and journals and things like that.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
What's great is that you really get a sense of the character. Again, he's like writing dialogue. You know what I mean? He's like a theater guy.
Yeah.
So he's put it into, I'm going to tell it just through what they're saying. It's not going to be through description of the
show rather than tell. Just show the inside of the brain. Yeah, it's perfect for a theater.
Oh yeah,
it's perfect.
Yeah,
you get two tables on either side, split stage.
Yeah,
boom.
You got the perfect main character to drive it. It's really. And of course, we all know the story. Jonathan Harker is sent to Transylvania to fill out some paperwork for old Count Dracula, who wants to move to London. And as soon as Harker arrives at Dracula's castle, he begins to notice how weird the old Count is.
Yeah.
And then Harker is seduced by 3 female vampires. Remember that
that's
scene?
In the movie. Yeah, that's in the movie. Yeah.
And of course, you're like, as you watch it, I'm like, of course, this stodgy English guy is going to be seduced by these 3 sexy vampires.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like in the book,
it's like the colonists. We're the Americans. We're the sexy vampires.
Yeah. But in the book, he keeps whining about how horrible it is. You know what I mean? Like, I can't believe they've taken.
Yeah.
But then Harker is taken prisoner by the Count, and those 3 sexy vampires just kind of suck his blood enough.
But they don't turn him into he doesn't turn into a vampire, right? They're just feeding off of him.
And then the Count moves to England, where he tries to seduce Harker's fiancée Mina and her friend Lucy Westenra. And what's interesting is Lucy Westenra is kind of an open sexually. Like she like flirts with a bunch of guys. She's very sexual. She wants to like have sex. She talks about sex, and of course she's seen as like the person who immediately gets attacked by the vampire.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, low hanging fruit.
Yeah, yeah. And then Harker, he escapes and makes it back to England, and then that's where he meets up with Van Helsing, who's there trying to track down Dracula.
Oh, Van Helsing.
Yeah, yeah. Great character.
Great character. Book and movies on him.
I know.
Van Helsing, the vampire hunter.
Yeah.
Everybody got a spinoff. Everybody. Everybody got a bite of the apple.
Yeah, even Renfield. Remember, Renfield is Dracula's helper who just like in the book, it just stays in a cell the whole time. Even he's got a movie now. They just came out with a Renfield movie.
Renfield. Because he would just eat rats, right? Or something like that.
In the Coppola one, he's eating bug. He's like steampunk almost. Remember, he's got like this crazy metal glove on, and he's eating bugs. And,
forgot about that.
but yeah, you're right. Everybody got their own film out of this, out of the franchise.
Yeah. It's like when you get on a hit TV show, you're good to go. Once you hit season 7, it's like forget about it.
Yeah. You don't have to do anything else the rest of your life.
Yep.
In fact, people don't want you to do anything else.
Yeah, well, that's the downside.
They
just like a vampire, you're trapped. Yeah. Guess what? You live forever, but you have to suck on people's blood. A lot of former sitcom stars can relate to that.
Yeah. They don't want you to come out in public. They don't want you to perform anything else. It's never as good as what you did before.
Yep. So. You just stay home and suck on the teat.
But anyway, over the years, people, as we've talked about, people have made a lot about the sexual symbolism in the Dracula book and in the movies. Yeah. And actually as we've mentioned before, it seems like all vampire movies have sex at the basis of the movie.
Yes.
And Fenn says there are plenty of psychoanalytical interpretations of the vampire myth, most of them to do with lust and fangs and the symbolism of penetrating delicate flesh. So something about the neck, what I mean? The neck being so
very sensual, very sensual.
Right.
Yeah.
And she says, even in the early vampire tales in the English language, at least, the themes are heavily symbolic and or moralistic. And women who dare to be openly sexual risk being punished by death, and men who actually know it's mostly just women. So she talks about how the men never have the same. They're not being punished for being openly sexual in these stories.
Right. Nobody wants to see that.
Yeah.
You just want to, Jesus.
And in his article, A Vampire in the Mirror, The Sexuality of Dracula, John Allen Stevenson says that vampire sexuality is in many ways like human sexuality, but human sexuality in which the psychological and metaphorical become physical or literal.
Whoa.
So again, what we're seeing in the vampire stories is what usually is the undercurrent. You know what I mean? It's like what culture is saying people should do, but in the vampire or shouldn't do, but the vampire is doing it openly.
Yeah, and we want to be the vampire.
right.
We want that.
Yeah, in the Dracula story, Jonathan and Mina have a very reserved, proper sexuality, which is just like holding hands and like not having premarital sex. But the Count and the female vampires, it's all out there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. That's amazing.
And I would say, and in the book, what is terrifying for the men in the book is that Mina and Lucy are being seduced by it, like they're giving into it.
Yes,
and
they want it.
Right, right. And I
Right.
would say even Jonathan Harker in the book also goes there too, but yet he's supposedly can control himself more. And so there's a passage in the book when when he first encounters those three female witches, he says all three had brilliant white teeth and shone like pearls against their ruby of their lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing and at the same time some deadly fear. I felt in my heart a wicked, burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. So he's he's turned on by it. You know what I
Yeah, of
mean? But it's
course. It's
yeah,
porn. It's
yeah,
yeah, he can't help it.
right,
They've
right.
got a hold on him.
Yeah, they were responsible for it. You know,
Yeah,
like when Mina falls for it with the count, it's
it's her
Mina's
fault.
fault.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all the women. It's all their
yeah,
fault.
yeah.
Whether you're coming or going,
Right.
we're
You
gonna
can't get
blame
out
you.
of it. You can't get out of it. And then Jonathan, you know, Stevenson says there are several ways to interpret the novel's attitude toward the sexuality these female vampires project. The first is that Stoker's expressing what have usually been regarded as typical Victorian attitudes about female sexuality.
Yeah,
So again,
yeah.
that's kind of what it was at the time. Women, you were supposed to stay home. If you're having sex, it was to procreate, and
But at
you
the
weren't
same
supposed to be
time,
enjoying it.
the beauty of the story is that a male watching it or reading it gets to act out all of his fantasies. You've either got
Right.
women attacking him that he can't help, it's not his
Yeah,
fault, or he's Dracula and is able to do whatever he
right,
wants.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely set up to be enjoyed more from one one perspective than another perspective,
Yeah,
I think.
for sure.
And you know, and other theories say that you know the violence against women in Dracula most vividly rendered in the staking of Lucy. Remember, they drive a stake through Lucy's heart when she
Oh,
turns into a vampire.
Jesus.
Reflects a hostility toward female sexuality felt by the culture at large at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And so again, you know, we have to keep in mind when we look at this that you know Sigmund Freud's theories about sexuality have been discredited as far as psychoanalysis goes. I mean,
Yes.
not many people go to Freud, but yet people still use it to look at artistic criticism, which always
so
seems
so crazy.
is it?
Jesus. Well, I mean, it's so interesting that it's broken. It doesn't. It's been tossed out, and yet we still use it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's perfect for like analyzing an artwork, I think.
Yeah,
You could
it
go in and
is.
use for all the symbolism and metaphor. It's so perfect. But yet just keep in mind that that's not it's not good for it won't make you better in like your shrink's office, you know, if your shrink starts talking about that. But then you know in most
Sometimes a wooden stake is just a wooden stake.
yeah, exactly. But what Stevenson is interesting too is he does something that I didn't see anyone else do, and that is Stevenson says, okay, he's not only going to look at Dracula from a psychoanalysis standpoint, he's going to look at it from an anthropological standpoint.
Here we
And
go.
right, and
Here
that's
we
right up
go.
our alley. That's right up our
Yeah.
alley, you know. And he says this reconsideration, meaning like considering it from an anthropological standpoint, can yield a fresh appreciation of the appeal of Stoker's story and suggest ways in which the novel embodies a quite powerful imagining of the nature of cultural and racial differences.
Hmm.
So, what he says, and remember when we did our episode on marriage, and we talked
Yes.
about exogamy and endogamy. Exogamy meaning that you marry and you mate within your group, or I mean, exogamy is when you marry and mate outside of your group. So you're
Right.
meeting people outside of your group. And
Mhm.
endogamy is when you mate and marry within your group. I have those
Right.
backwards. But what Stevenson says is he quotes Robin Fox, and Robin Fox said he was an anthropologist who said exogamy had some boundaries. Usually, you know, groups speaking the same language and being alike in other ways might well exchange wives among themselves.
Hmm.
But you know, the boundaries stopped at you know when it came to other languages and other territory or color,
Mhm.
and that because that became a them and not an
Uh-huh.
us.
The foreign.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so Steven says when you think about that reading Dracula, Dracula himself is a foreigner. He is
Yes.
from Eastern Europe. He's strange. He has a strange skin color. He has this horrible accent,
Yeah.
uh, these strange customs. And he's come to, not only that, he's come to England and he's
Right.
trying to seduce the women, the English women, away from their own group.
He's
And that's
sucking on the English culture.
right, right. And
Uh-huh.
he's, and the thing is, the women are falling for it. That's what's so threatening to the
Mm-hmm.
middle class Englishmen who are characters in Dracula, is that this foreigner has come here and
And
all of
he's
our women want to like have sex with him, basically.
uh-huh. That's so interesting. That is an
Yeah.
interesting way of looking at this.
Yeah. And Stevenson says, there's a line in the book where the Van Helsing and Harker and all of them trap Dracula and they corner him. And Dracula says, "My revenge has just begun. I spread it over centuries, and time is on my side. Your girls that you all love are mine already, and through them and others shall yet be mine. My creatures to do my bidding and to be my jackals when I want to feed." So Dracula's actually even telling them, like, I've seduced your women away and made them mine.
Wow.
so then it becomes this whole story about miscegenation, or like even in Deuteronomy, I guess there's in Deuteronomy it says that, like, Jewish people shouldn't marry outside of Judaism because they'll take away your sons will turn to another faith or something like that, I think
Yes.
is what it is.
Right. And I think they were talking about the Canaanites, those badass Canaanites.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where what he's talking about, when you look at Dracula that way, it becomes a story that the vampire is seducing people away from their culture. Is
Yes.
so
Yes.
yeah.
Sucking the blood right out of being an American.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
and that's kind of like when people talk about now of, like, immigrants coming to this country. Oh, they're taking our blood. They're taking, and
Yes.
then it, like, the blood and the semen, that is in, a vampire story becomes like this whole other potent symbolism for people, because, or a metaphor of, like, oh my God, they're afraid. They're afraid of the vampire.
Meanwhile, Brom is probably writing it in a way to he's just looking for things that, like you said, he was a theater guy.
Yeah,
He's just
yeah.
looking for things to turn to push our buttons,
Right,
So
right.
making him a foreigner makes it even scarier and weirder, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah. And there's a scene in the book, and they do it in the movie too, but it's when Mina finally succumbs to the Count, and she wants to go with the Count.
Yeah.
And the Count, he takes his fingernail and he cuts open his chest,
Uh-huh.
and blood starts to come out, and he like wants her to drink from his chest. And it's a very sexual scene, and a lot of people have said that it seems like fellatio, really, is what
Uh-huh.
critics have
Uh-huh.
said. And in Coppola's movie, if you see that scene, it's shot as if it's fellatio.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So it's this combination of her giving in to the foreignness, but also doing something very unnatural sexually for
Uh-huh.
a proper Victorian woman at that time.
Uh-huh. But
And
something that all the men that are reading the book are going, "Oh my God,
yeah.
I
And
wish I
Mina,
were Dracula."
I know. And in the book, Mina's writing is told from her perspective, and she said that the Count said to her, "When my brain says come to you, you shall cross land or sea to do my bidding, and to that end this." And with that, she says he pulled open his shirt, and with his long sharp nails opened a vein in his breast. When the blood began to spurt out, he took my hands in one of his, holding them tight, and with the other seized my neck and pressed my mouth to the wound so that I must either suffocate or swallow some of the. Oh my God, what have I done? So it's very, very
Ooh.
sexual, but it's this combination of bodily fluids being mixed with, like, you're betraying your culture as well.
Boy, Stoker really, he knew he had money in the bank on this one.
I know. Like, you read some of those scenes and you're just like, oh my God, that's so hot. That's so hot.
Yeah.
So then, John, just to begin to wrap up with, is there any rational medical explanation for reported cases of vampirism in the past? And Mark Collins Jenkins, in his book Vampire Forensics: Uncovering the Origins of an Enduring Legend, says that there have been a few medical explanations that have been put out for reported vampires, when people have actually thought that there have been vampires.
Okay.
And one of them is rabies. And
that's great. Yeah. Rabies. Because you get bit, you get the disease. There's nothing you can do about it. And the early stages of having rabies, isn't there sexual side effects?
Yeah.
Like you get highly sexualized.
Yeah. It stimulates the neurological system. And therefore you're
Oh my God.
And not to mention, there was a guy, Juan Gomez Alonso, who was a neurologist in Vigo, Spain, who published an article in 1998 where he was making the article that it was rabies. And he said, you get aggressive at first. You want to bite other people. And again, you get erections, you get aroused, aroused with it. And not only that, think about like what animals carry rabies a lot, and they're wolves and bats, which are associated with vampires.
I love it.
And then, Gomez Alonso, he also makes an observation. He went back and looked at the historical record, and he saw that in the 1700s, when there were outbreaks of vampirism or vampire epidemics in Europe, they usually came on the heels of being rabies epidemics.
Wait a minute. There were outbreaks of vampirism? People would just start drinking blood?
No. What happened is there was a famous case in Serbia back in like the 1720s, I think it was. And there was a guy who died. His name was Arnold Paul. And before he had died, he had mentioned to some people at the time that, years ago, I had been bothered by a vampire. So, what? Yeah. And he goes, I got away from it. So anyway, Arnold Paul dies from a fall from a wagon. And after that, people in this one village in Serbia started dying. Like 13 to 16 people died. And so people were trying to think of like, why is everybody... It has to be Arnold Paul. Remember he talked about that vampire. He must have been a vampire, or now he's a vampire. Oh. So they dug him up. And when they dug him up, they realized his body hadn't decomposed.
Ooh.
And so that's when people started saying he's definitely a vampire. And so then when they drove a stake through his heart, the report was he made like a groan when they...
Well, don't your lungs fill up with air? Dead bodies make all kinds of noises.
Yeah. Oh. And also they said he was like bleeding, which, it's like, of course, like when your body starts to decompose, there's going to be like fluids and things in it.
Oh, Arnold.
But the government in Vienna sent like some doctors down there to look at it. And the doctors, they thought it was like splenic fever. They, obviously they didn't think it was a vampire, but all the locals thought it was a vampire. And so what they did is they gave permission for people, if you want to dig them up, cut their heads off and burn them, by all means, go ahead. You know what I mean?
So, yeah. So they did that to all of the people that he killed that died. Yeah. They went and dug them all up and chopped off all of their heads.
Right. The people who...
Jesus.
Yeah. Ironically, though, it was the people who were part of the military. They didn't do that too. so you could tell that they were already just like, oh, let them do whatever they want. They're going to think that it's a vampire. But anyway, when it's called the Fluckinger report, Fluckinger. When
Fluckinger.
when the Fluckinger report came out, they basically were saying, this is what people said was happening, so we let them go on and dig up these bodies and decapitate them and burn them. But people took like, well, this is a military doctor writing this report. It must be true. You know what I mean? So
Right.
Fluckinger's report became like the ground zero for vampire outbreaks and vampire epidemics in Europe. And people thought Fluckinger was actually saying that, vampires do exist. But really, Fluckinger was just kind of saying like, oh, these people, just let them do it just so they'll calm down.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
anyway, yeah.
And so then there would just be reports of vampires throughout.
Right.
From then on, you just have little pockets of people saying there's a vampire. These people died because of a vampire.
Yeah. And it's almost always, it's based on what the body looked like when they dug up the body. And there's a folklorist named Paul Barber who wrote a book in 1988 called Vampires, Burial, and Death. And Barber basically says nearly all traits associated with a folkloric vampire originated in misunderstandings about decaying bodies.
Uh-huh.
And that's what he's saying, like people, they all of our people are dying. We can't figure out why they're dying. We better dig up so-and-so's body and let's look and see if he's a vampire. And one of the ways, they look at it and they say, okay, well, his body's not decomposed. He's got to be a vampire. Or they would say, hey, his body looks fresh, or he's put on weight. He's obviously feeding,
and pretending to be dead right now.
Right. Or his fingernails had grown, or there was lack of rigor mortis. And all of these things were used to say that somebody was a vampire. And what Barber's saying is that all of these can be explained by natural processes that happen when the body decomposes.
Yeah, because fingernails keep growing for a little while after you die, right?
Well, fingernails are dead tissue, but what happens is the body begins to dry out and the skin recedes from the fingernail. So it looks
it looks longer. Yeah. I see.
Yeah. And the other thing people said, the body's preserved, and people have looked at, well, when was the body buried? So if you were buried in winter, then obviously you would be frozen and you wouldn't decay as much as if you had died during the summer, for example.
Wow.
The other thing about like putting on weight, it's like bodies swell when they decompose. And then one of the things, lack of rigor mortis, they say usually rigor mortis starts right after somebody dies, but then after 40 hours or so, it goes away.
It dissipates. So, interesting.
Yeah. And then like you mentioned
again.
Right. So people would open up the grave, weeks later and be like, look, he's not stiff anymore. He's obviously been out moving around. And then the body, as it decomposes, it fills up with gas, like you mentioned, so that if you drive a stake through it, it's going to force that gas through the voice box and make it sound like somebody's groaning as if they're alive.
Oh, God. Oh, so scary and gross.
Yeah. And finally, the grossest thing is there's something called purge fluid, which is when your internal organs begin to liquefy.
Oh.
And it turns into this dark reddish fluid, which begins to seep out of the mouth and the nose.
Oh, so it looks like there's blood. Oh, right. God.
So it looks like people have been out, as a vampire going out at night and feasting on blood or whatever.
Oh.
So again, Barber says that all of those things that people thought were, signs of vampires are actually just misunderstandings of natural processes that happen.
Except for the one that's real.
yeah, there's always that one. There's always that 1%. There's always that 1%.
So, John, be safe than sorry.
Yeah.
When in doubt, shove a stake through their heart and cut their head off.
Yeah, it's
Jesus.
So anyway, in conclusion, I guess I would say, I don't think vampires exist in reality, in the physical world, although there is something called clinical vampirism or Renfield syndrome, which is like people have the urge to drink human blood. but but I think they certainly exist subconsciously, or in literature they exist, and also in psychology or in culture.
It's such a great. It's such a great little foil to open up certain aspects of who we are as humans.
Yeah.
Through story, and that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like why it touches us.
Yeah, I don't know, and it's still, I think we've talked about it. The jealousy or like wanting to have that power. Do you think if you could become a vampire, hypothetically, do you think you would become a vampire?
Well, hell no. I don't want to. It's the living forever thing is the thing that scares the hell out of me. Just seems so lonely. Jesus. Just to make friends, watch them all die, and then make new friends, watch all of them die. It just seems like horrible.
Yeah. I mean, to me too, it's like I couldn't deal with the guilt. Like you'd have to feed off other people.
Oh yeah, there's that too. God, I hadn't even considered that part.
I mean, it's like all the things, all the guilt and disappointment, and like always remembering things. It's like that's like recovery. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it is. Like oh my God, forever. Yeah. Oh God, you're right.
Yeah. It's interesting. Voltaire said, Voltaire wrote about vampires as well because he was writing in the 1700s after that outbreak in Serbia. So Voltaire was saying, we never heard a word of vampires in London or even in Paris. I confess that in both these cities there were stock jobbers, brokers, and men of business, meaning businessmen, who sucked the blood of the people in broad daylight. Yeah. But they were not dead, though corrupted. These true suckers live not in cemeteries, but in very agreeable palaces. Yes, and I think that's great.
Voltaire. Yeah. What about theater of the vampire in France? What about that? Where does that fit into all of this?
I don't know. I've never. What are you talking about? The theater of the vampire?
Oh God, isn't there a okay, we'll offline. I'll check into it. I'll post.
You mean like Grand Guignol? They do that Grand Guignol, which is like very bloody theater in France, was popular.
Yes,
and they were kind of like horror stories before films and before TV. Yeah,
amazing. I would have loved to have seen some of that, man.
Yeah,
it's like splatter theater in Chicago.
I would love
remember that show? That was great.
Yeah, no, I think it would be such a fun show. It's to be in a live audience for that and have like stuff flying off the stage. Oh, yeah, I'd love to do a production like that.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. Giaour, I think that rock band Giaour, they do a lot of blood, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So I guess just final thoughts. I'd say, yeah, we we do have vampires amongst us, but they're not Nosferatus. They're called assholes.
Yeah,
they're called narcissists.
Yeah. And you can kill them by driving a stake through their heart, but you're gonna go to jail.
Yeah,
unfortunately, they control everything.
There.
Oh, they'll
suck the life out. They'll suck the life out of you and destroy your life. They're suckers.
They'll take your girlfriend away.
Yeah. All right, John. Well, this has been enjoyable.
Yes. This is human number 2 signing off.
And this is human number 1. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this podcast and found it interesting, please tell a friend about it. And also, always remember, send us some vampires that we forgot. You can send those, and we'll post those. And also, if you have a topic that you think people should know about and you want us to take a look at, then please send that along.
Right on.
All right.
Love
you, guys.
Got to get back in our coffins. Sun's coming up.
That's right. Thanks a lot, John. Love you. Love you guys. Thanks for listening.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.